I too acknowledge that we're standing today on country that is traditionally owned by the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, that our ceremony takes place on their lands and their waters. I pay my respects to traditional owners and elders, past and present, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples present here today. My name is Virginia Langerberg. I'm a senior reporter and presenter at SBS World News. We do have cameras with us here today. Please let us know if you don't want to be on camera. We can make sure you're not filmed if that's your wish. Now, I was born in Sweden. I have proud Tanzanian heritage. My mother is Tanzanian. She's in the front row with us today. My family migrated here from Sweden to South Australia when I was a young child. It is my pleasure to be your MC for today's event. This is the second year I have the honour to do this. It's always such a wonderful ceremony. Last time we did this, we were all boiling hot out here, so La Nina playing her best card today, at least the weather cloud's holding off. Now, I'd like to welcome every one of you as donors and supporters of Australia's National Maritime Museum on this very special day to unveil panels on Australia's National Monument to Migration, just to my right over there. Firstly, there are several distinguished guests with us present who I wish to acknowledge. Representatives from the following embassies and consulates: Cyprus, Greece, the Netherlands, the People's Republic of China, the United Kingdom. Representatives from our supporters are HEPA Australia, HEPA New South Wales, the Australian Malaysian Singaporean Association, Ethnic Communities Council of New South Wales, the Greek Festival of Sydney, the Greek Welfare Centre, the Catherian Association of Australia, Multicultural New South Wales Advisory Board, Paulus Brothers Seafoods, and of course SBS. Councillors of the Museum and Directors of the Foundation Board, donors, sponsors and supporters of the museum, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all of you, a very warm welcome. Now, today here at the museum, we celebrate the contribution migrants have made to this country. We hope that today can remind us all of the great fortune we have being here together as a collective of cultures and communities united in celebration both of journeying and of coming home. Today, we are adding 876 names to the National Monument to Migration of people who represent 50 different countries. The top 10 communities in order of representation in today's ceremony, and we'll hear a shout out from anyone if you hear your country. At number 1, Greece. The United Kingdom. Italy. Cyprus. Germany. Poland. Hey, the Netherlands, Lebanon, China, Egypt, South Africa, and rounding out the top 10, the United States. Isn't that wonderful? Now, it really shows the changing diversity in Australia. Please raise your hand if you are a migrant or the child of a migrant. And keep your hand in the air if your name is being added to the monument today. Fantastic. Congratulations to all of us. Our names will join more than 31,000 inscriptions on this national monument. We're all in esteemed company, and your contribution is helping to recognise our proud, diverse national story. Now, before we go on, a little bit of housekeeping, because not everyone can make it today. The event is being recorded, as I mentioned, and also it will be posted to the museum's website. We'll also send you a link to the recording for you to share with family and friends. We'd love you to share your experience as well of the day. If you're posting videos or photos, please use the hashtag #SeaMuseum, SEAMUSEUM, and tag us at SeaMuseum. For the bathroom, please note there are toilets behind us, well, behind you, in front of me, on the first floor in Wharf 7, and more around the harbour side of the museum next to the Ripples Cafe. And as I mentioned before, we do have a film crew, a gentleman here in the blue jacket with SBS. We will be featuring this on SBS World News tonight as well, so hope to see all your faces on the TV screen. Please do speak to the crew or myself if you don't want to be filmed, and we can make sure that's worked around. Now, in a moment, we'll hear from some people of families whose names are being added to the monument, but first, I'd like to introduce Museum Director and CEO, Ms. Daryl Karp.
Thank you, Virginia. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I too acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of the Bamal and the Badu, the lands and the waters on which the museum is located, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to all First Nations people who are present here today. And thank you, Brendan Kerrin, for that fantastic welcome. Welcome to the Australian National Maritime Museum, our Museum of the Sea. It's fitting that we're sitting here on a wharf near to where so many of the migrants first disembarked after a long journey to their new home. It's a real honour to be here to acknowledge all of the families whose names appear on the monument. It's my first unveiling ceremony, and it is indeed a privilege to welcome everybody here. The stories of migrants speak to universal themes: belonging, love, family, safety, and imagination. Some are stories marked by adversity, loss, and sadness. Many speak of opportunity and new beginnings, but at the centre of all of them is hope. I speak from personal experience. My family's journey took us in just 4 generations from Lithuania, the United Kingdoms, and Germany to South Africa, and then in the 80s to Australia. The Australian immigration story and the Australian migration story has shaped so much of our history, and it's one of the pillars of the work that we do here at the museum. It is increasingly a major priority for our collection and storytelling, and so we are immensely proud to be the home of the National Monument to Migration. This monument is an important way for this museum to honour, collect, and hold your stories, which collectively makes up our national story. Our migration-related activities underpin the National Monument to Migration, and they include collections, exhibitions, programs, events, and our acclaimed educational resources. We will shortly, within the next couple of weeks, be launching an exciting new digital storytelling experience to start sharing our migration stories more widely. And of course, we will let everybody know about it. We're very excited about that particular activity. Your donation to the Migration Heritage Fund supports this national monument and the work that we do, so I thank all of you. It's been a real privilege to be part of this journey so far. Everyone on this monument, all 31,000, but particularly the 870 plus, is an important part of our museum family, and we consider you to be our champions. Your stories of hope, of struggle, of endeavour, growth, of challenges and learnings, and so much more are the stories that people come back to our museum to hear and learn about. So I hope you'll think of us as home, that you'll visit us regularly, that you'll share your stories with us, and that you'll continue to share your experiences with us so that we can share them with the rest of Australia. There are many organisations that help us do what we do, and I'd like to acknowledge all of them: the embassies, the consulates, the community and media organisations who all assist us in spreading this important word and story to the whole of Australia. But I'd particularly like to thank SBS for their leadership and passion for multicultural Australia. I have a personally strong connection. I was on the board of SBS for a number of years, and I cannot tell you what a wonderful organisation it is to work with and to be part of. So thank you, SBS. SBS has been a founding partner for the museum's original Welcome Wall, and we thank you for your continued ongoing support for both the museum's migration campaigns and for multicultural communication in Australia generally. Everybody, welcome to this wonderful space, this beautiful dock that we're sitting on, to the museum, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daryl, and for the whole team for making this monument possible. It is now my pleasure to introduce Richard Arculis. Richard is an Australian petrologist and volcanologist. Please make Richard feel welcome.
So good morning, everybody. Thank you to Tina and the museum for asking me to tell our migration story today. I'm speaking on behalf of my recently deceased wife, Tricia Morton, eldest son, Stephen, and myself. Our other two children, Jenny and Robert, who is here today, were born in Canberra subsequent to our initial migration to Australia. My wife was born in Amman, Jordan, in 1951. Her father, Alec Morton, was a serving officer on Wellington bombers in the RAF during the Second World War and was lucky to survive that war. He continued service with the RAF into the 1950s, but consequently, her family led a peripatetic life during her early childhood. I was born in 1949 and lived for the first 8 years of my life in India. My father was working for the Dunlop Rubber Company, which had a factory in Sargunj near Kolkata. I lived the luxurious life of an expatriate child in a salubrious compound near the factory. The compound included a swimming pool where I learned to swim before I could walk. It was on the west bank of the Hooghly River. I can recall attempting to dig a tunnel under the river to reach the other side. I didn't get far, but it fostered an interest in geology. I can remember thinking on my family's move to Dunlop's global headquarters in Birmingham, England, that the grass was drastically greener elsewhere in the world than Birmingham. A degree of detachment relative to place, I believe, both for Tricia and myself, was engendered by these early experiences. Tricia and I met at the University of Durham in the United Kingdom. Tricia completed a Bachelor of Science, and I finished my PhD there. For me, this had involved field work on the volcanoes of the Lesser Antilles in the Caribbean, a formative experience, I can tell you. We married in July 1973, and the next month migrated to the United States of America. We never subsequently returned to the United Kingdom for employment, but so began a married life that involved several migrations. I had never planned to pursue an academic career, believing a way to explore the world out of Birmingham would be through working for a mineral exploration company. But academic opportunities arose, and the first was a postdoctoral fellowship for 2 years at the Carnegie Institution in Washington, D.C. We were in that city during the terminal years of the Nixon presidency, but I assert I had nothing to do with the end of it. I was then offered a tenure-track assistant professorship in 1975 at Rice University in Houston, Texas. With our newly granted green cards, we planned to make this our home, bought a house, and explored much of the American Southwest on geological fieldwork during the next 2 years. But late in 1976, I was awoken in the middle of the night and offered a 5-year research-only position at the Research School of Earth Sciences of the Australian National University in Canberra. Tricia was pregnant at this time, but thought the job opportunity would be a wonderful experience, and we should take the chance and migrate again. We travelled via the United Kingdom, staying in Tricia's case with family, and our son Stephen was born in Sutton Coldfield near Birmingham. I flew to Australia in February 1977. Tricia followed in March with 8-week-old Stephen. England in February is cold, dank, dark the majority of the day. Southeast Australia in February, as you know, is not. But my first impressions were established at the immigration desk of Sydney Airport. Welcoming but forbiddingly tall, tanned and short-sleeved officials greeted me. Canberra was hot, dry, clean, tidy, and very different from the UK industrial cities, or for that matter, the growing metropolis of Houston. We bought a house. Our family grew with the births of daughter Jenny and Robert. Tricia became heavily involved with a group of determined, committed, sharply intelligent women who established the first Montessori schools in Canberra. Many of these people have remained lifelong friends. She intended to become a kindergarten and primary school teacher. We love the landscapes, vegetation and wildlife of Australia and would like to have stayed beyond the duration of the ANU fellowship. But lack of academic job opportunities, and by contrast, their availability back in the United States, drove us across the Pacific again. I was offered a position at the University of Michigan in 1983. We stayed there for 6 years, establishing new friends and seeing more of the United States, particularly the grandeur of the American Northwest. But Tricia strongly wanted to return to Australia, gain a teaching qualification, and teach in the public school system. The first opportunity that arose was a position for me at the University of New England in Armidale. We surrendered our second set of green cards and emigrated back across the Pacific late in 1989, arriving in Sydney the day of the Canberra Raiders' grand final victory. Tricia completed her graduate diploma of education and started her teaching career at the two-teacher Kingstown School in the country 60 kilometres west of Armidale. Jenny and Robert, by dint of birth, were Australian citizens. After a couple of years, the rest of us applied for and were granted Australian citizenship. Our family life completed a circle in 1994 when I was offered a position back at the Australian National University. Tricia was simultaneously offered a job in the public school system in the ACT. Our global employment wanderings ceased at that time. We have relished being back in Canberra, have lived there longer cumulatively than anywhere else, and finally in our lives, developed a deep affection for place. Tricia believed our inscription on the migration wall would mark our appreciation of the opportunity to live in this exceptional country. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Richard, and what a wonderful story of migration and what a wonderful gift for your wife, Tricia, as well. Now, everyone, if you would please stand and join me in welcoming Olivia Fox, a Wiradjuri woman who will sing the national anthem in both English and the language of the Eora Nation.
Australia, Gullyonga.
So beautiful. Now, I don't know about you, but I prefer the first version. I wish we learnt that one at school. Thank you, Olivia. That was very, very special. Now, the museum has worked very closely with the Greek community over the past year in a special fundraiser to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the Greek War of Independence and to honour the contribution of Greek Australians in building our nation. As a result, today we add 226 new inscriptions honouring people from Greece and 18 from Cyprus, including the first 10 Greek migrants to Australia. That deserves a round of applause. Now that leads us to our next speaker, Eugenia Mitrakis, who has joined us from Melbourne today. The Greek community of Melbourne is the third largest community of the Greek diaspora and one of the largest Greek-speaking population outside of Greece and Cyprus. Please make her welcome.
Good morning, all. I feel honoured to be invited to address you today and would like to thank Tina and all her colleagues for their hard work in getting all this together. I grew up in a small mountain village on the island of Lesbos in the early 1950s. I was bright and villagers were sure that I would become a teacher, but I wanted more. I wanted to be a doctor. My father, one of the few men in the village with higher education, migrated to Australia when I was 4. My mother wanted him to return, and after 4 years, when he didn't, she packed up my older sister and brother, and we sailed to join him on the SS Kaugum. I had completed 3 years of school in the village. We had one suitcase between us. There was no room for my hair ribbons, but I had around my neck my treasured wafer-thin gold cross gifted to me by my grandmother and a wafer-thin gold Parthenon gifted to me by my favourite uncle. They remained a constant reminder of my Greek heritage. I recall during the journey a sea burial conducted by the ship's captain, queuing up each morning for a ration of milk for my older seasick siblings and being introduced to my first banana. There was excitement when we finally reached Australian land, followed by bitter disappointment when my mother announced we had 5 more days at sea. Welcome to Fremantle. We arrived at Station Pier on the cold wintry day. The front page news of the day was the Petrov defection. My first impressions of Australia were not positive. Rows and rows of timber houses lined the main road with lacework that looked just like my mother's doilies. We left our 3-storey stone house for this. The taxi then turned into luxuriant Kerford Road, where we later settled permanently. The location was fortuitous because at the end of the road was the Macrobertson Girls' High School. I attended the school competing with Melbourne's gifted girls. I was 8 years old on arrival, but turned 9 the next day. And I was looking forward to starting school in year 4. But to my humiliation, no doubt because I was vertically challenged, I was put in grade 1. At least I learnt my nursery rhymes and completed 3 years in 1. I attended the University of Melbourne on a Commonwealth scholarship, studying law arts, majoring in classical Greek. I visited Greece after I completed my studies, where I had my epiphany. Until then, I was a Greek living in my adopted country, but when I returned, I was a fully pledged Australian, proud of my Greek heritage and the realisation of just how much Australia had offered me. On my admission day, I was the only female, and the Sun newspaper was there to record it as the first Greek female admitted to practice, with a large photo on page 3. The article did not go unnoticed by the Immigration Department, who sent journalists to interview me. The department's articles and photos were circulated worldwide to promote Australia as the destinations where dreams could come true. And I was happy to participate and sing Australia's praises. In 1988, Vogue Australia interviewed me for an article for their bicentennial celebrations. In this article, Diana Bagnall wrote, "She straddles the Greek community and the wider Australian populace with the agility of one who has been subjected to the mores of both. Her Greek connections are her alpha, but not her omega. Greekness is a stock onto which she has grafted a predominantly Australian lifestyle. Growing older, I feel even more privileged to call myself Australian. I have used my privileged position to offer back to the Australian and Greek community the debt that I owe Australia for welcoming me to my adopted country and giving me such amazing opportunities. This pro bono work commenced in my undergraduate days and continued for 50 years. I remember fondly the ceremony I attended when I was 10 at the South Melbourne Town Hall when I became a proud Australian citizen. I am just as proud and humbled today at being recognised in this national monument to migration, which is an equally significant time in my life.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Eugenia. And thank you as well to the following Greek community organisations who have supported the Greek Bicentenary Fund. Our partner, the Greek Welfare Centre and supporters, the Greek Herald, the Greek City Times, the Greek Festival of Sydney, AHEPA Australia, AHEPA New South Wales, the Lemnian Association of New South Wales, and the Sydney Restaurant Group, and many individual donors who have contributed as well. Thank you all so very much. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you our next speaker, an Australian of Polish heritage who has honoured his parents' migration journeys by adding their names to the monument. Please welcome Nick Lewotki.
Friends, we're here today to acknowledge the 31,000 names on the National Monument of Migration Wall and to celebrate the 876 new names from 50 countries to be unveiled today. I'm proud to be here today for a number of reasons. First, because of where I came from. Secondly, because of who I represent. And thirdly, it gives me the opportunity to speak about my parents, Antony and Alexandra Lewotki. My mother was born in Janki, Poland. My father was born in Kroswice, Poland. They were both raised working on their parents' farm. My mother told me stories of the difficult life they had under the Stalin era. She said the school children were warned not to speak about conversations in their home or identify people who may have been listening to the free radio broadcasts, because what would happen is, in the middle of the night, police would visit that family and they were not heard of again. When Germany invaded Poland at the start of World War II, they and thousands of Polish citizens were transported to Germany as forced labour. I was born in 1947 in Papenburg, Germany after the war. At the end of the war, my parents fled war-ravaged Europe to find a different and better life for themselves and me. They arrived in Australia on the good ship Delhi, departing Brethaven, Germany on the 15th of December arriving in Sydney on the 15th of January 1950. Life could have been different because we were processed to go to Canada, but my father developed a lung infection and was rejected. They arrived in Sydney with empty pockets and a suitcase full of dreams. I have recollections of our family living in Villawood Migrant Hostel without the razor wire and guards, as our family struggled with language difficulties and sought employment. My parents, like so many others who arrived in similar circumstances, struggled to make a better life for their families. My sister, brothers and I are beneficiaries of their efforts and the fact that Australia welcomed us all. My father had a drive to be successful and by the mid-1950s purchased a shop general store at Glenfield. Pause for a moment. How do recently arrived migrants with little grasp of the local language, let alone customs, manage to raise funds and operate a small business? This same drive for success is evident today with recently arrived refugees who have developed entrepreneurial skills necessary to own and operate their own small businesses. The Lewocki family grew with the birth of Christine in 1950, Henry in 1951, and Edward Ted in 1957. I can recall how proud my parents were in 1963 when they attended Campbelltown Town Hall for their naturalisation certificate. My mother passed away at age 41 in 1966 and my father at 72 in 1995. In my working life, I started the New South Wales Government Railways that employed thousands of refugees and immigrants from Europe who were later joined by refugees from Southeast Asia, Middle East Africa and Latin America. These refugees and immigrants, along with my mother and father, were welcomed in Australia and they became part of Australia's multicultural society. I'd like to thank my son Kevin and his wife Alison for organising this permanent record of my parent and my arrival in Australia. I'd like to thank my son David for his assistance in driving me here today because of my health problems. My wife Wendy and sister Christine could not attend today because of health reason. I thank my friends and family who are here to celebrate this important event. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick, for sharing your story and welcome to the wall as well. Our next guest and our final speaker today is Stephen Nguyen. Stephen's family is of Vietnamese origin and we welcome him to now share his story. Stephen.
I am the proud Australian-born Vietnamese son of Vincent Nguyen and Kim Phan. I'm here today to honour my parents and share their immigration story. Theirs is one of thousands, as many fled Vietnam due to poverty, oppression and violence in the years following the war. Mum and Dad have painful memories of their lives in Vietnam during this time. Food was scarce, basic freedoms were restricted and possessions seized. They were constantly monitored, could not travel freely and could not practice their faith. They lived in constant fear as many were suddenly arrested and relocated, never to be seen again. After a decade of this, they decided to flee by boat in the 1980s. Having both lived in the city their whole lives, they were unable to swim and had never seen the ocean before. They also knew the journey would be extremely dangerous. Many before them drowned at sea, were murdered or kidnapped by pirates, or were captured and imprisoned by the government. Despite this, they were willing to risk their lives to acquire safety and freedom for themselves, their families, and their future children. Dad fled at age 26 with his pregnant sister-in-law and her 2 young children. They crammed aboard a small fishing boat with 70 others. A few days into their journey, they realized that they were lost and were heading back to Vietnam. With no one else to depend on, Dad stepped up and took the role of a navigator, despite never having sailed before. He successfully led them to safety, where they were rescued by a Singaporean ship 3 days later. They were taken to multiple refugee camps before then eventually arriving in Australia. Mum fled at age 20 with her 2 sisters, her brother, and her young nieces and nephews. They were crowded onto a small fishing boat with 100 others. Their journey took a turn for the worse when they discovered there was no drinking water on board. With the authorities close behind, it was too late to turn back. In an act of desperation, they emptied many barrels of fuel and filled them up with water from the river. They eventually escaped to sea but had run out of fuel, drifting helplessly without food and with only fuel-contaminated water to drink. Many passed away due to malnutrition, and others drowned while swimming out in search of help. It would be 13 days before they were rescued. They arrived in a refugee camp in Indonesia, where living conditions were poor. There were no blankets, they slept on wooden crates and were given little food. They were then relocated to another camp, where they saw many women sexually harassed, raped, and others taking their own lives. It'd be 7 months until they were moved to Singapore before arriving in Australia on Mum's 21st birthday. My parents still remember their initial feelings once they arrived here. They were scared but amazed at the cleanliness and the new social liberties they had. Dad remembers being moved by the generosity and kindness shown to him by locals. Mum remembers being astonished that Aussies could have naturally so many different hair colours of red, blue, green, having not known what hair dye was at the time. Both remember feeling extremely grateful that this new country welcomed them in with open arms and gave them food, water, and shelter. Settling in Australia was not without its challenges for them. They struggled with loneliness from being separated from their loved ones with no easy means of communication. Their most difficult challenge was deciding to sacrifice their own dreams of university to work to support their family back home. They graciously accepted every job that came their way. Dad had many jobs, from cleaning toilets to building caravans. In his spare time, he read and studied as much as he could to upskill for the future. He also jumped at every opportunity to integrate and live out the Australian dream. He is the reason why we spent many hours as kids packed into a van, visiting places such as the Big Banana, the Big Merino, and my favourite, Movie World. Mum also had multiple jobs and worked multiple shifts. Outside work, she would talk to as many locals as she could, whenever she could, to improve her English. She would continue this to this day, making friends everywhere she'd go. Mum and Dad worked hard those first few years and saved little of their earnings for themselves. Most of their earnings went to migrating the remaining family to Australia. Eventually, they got married, bought a house, and settled down in southwest Sydney. They then raised 5 wonderful children and then opened up the butcher, creatively named Liz Vincent Butchery, Liz being my older sister. Today, Mum is retired and Dad works part-time as a maintenance worker at school. They love traveling to restaurants and sites in the city. Their favorite afternoon activity is watching a daily quiz show where they can be heard shouting at Eddie to lock in B. During the process of writing this speech, I asked my parents, how were you able to remain positive to build a life despite going through so much? To which my dad just replied, choosing to leave was accepting that you would die. Surviving felt like being reborn. I think this is why, despite all they endured, there's not a day that goes by that they don't feel like they're the luckiest people on earth to get to call this great country of ours home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for sharing that harrowing but incredible story. I think I can guess who your parents are. I think they were the ones in the second row there, shedding a tear and had their phones out. Congratulations, welcome. I want to ask as well, has Mum tried the blue hair colouring yet, or no? No. Now, we have a special performance just to round things out. One of Sydney's premier Greek bands, Ehonics. Today with us we have Adoni and Angelo, who are the founding members of Ehonics and make up part of an 8-piece group. They'll be performing with Cretan lyra and lute and playing songs from the islands, mainland Greece and Crete. Please make them feel welcome.
Το καθρέφτακι σου παλιό, μα πίσω απ' τη θαβάδα, η Σμύρνη με το κορδελιό και η παλιά Ελλάδα, και η παλιά Ελλάδα. Μου τσουρωμένο το γυαλί, μα πίσω απ' τους καπνούς του βλέπει ο Θεός το αϊβαλί και σταματάει ο νους του, και σταματάει ο νους του. Τα σμυρνέικα τραγουδιά ποιος σου τα μάθε, να τα λες και να δακρύζεις της καρδιάς μου αν θε. Τα σμυρνέικα τραγουδιά ποιος σου τα μάθε, να τα λες και να δακρύζεις της καρδιάς μου αν θε. Η τυράτα μας στη Κουρελού, τη χιλιοπαλωμένη, όλο την εμπαλώναμε κι όλο ήταν εξεσκιζεμένη. Εβήρα μια στα πανιά, εβήρα δυο στο χωριό, εβήρα τρεις στο σπίτι της. Βρε να το ξέρε η μάνα μου, πως δουλεύα στην τεράτα, θα μου στέλνε τα ρούχα μου, ρε και την παλιά μου βράκα. Εβήρα μια στα πανιά, εβήρα δυο στο χωριό, εβήρα τρεις στο σπίτι της. Για λέλη, για λέλη, για λέλη, για σάλαχ, μωρέ για λέλη, για λέλη, για χαρά σας βρε παιδιά. Σου μιλώ και κοκκινίζεις, τι να φανταστώ, όσο θα βρεις το σποράκι τόσο βγάνει ανθό. Στο μικρόφωνο ανεβαίνω, το θεριό γελά, μόνος είμαι στην ορχήστρα με έναν ίσιο πλάι. Έλα στο χορό, μόνο να σε βλέπω, μόνο αυτό μπορώ. Βρε νύχτα ξαστεριά, άναψαν φωτάκια σ' όλα τα χωριά. Κι ο σύρτος σιγά μας πάει πίσω από το γερό κι αρχίνας να κοκκινίζεις πιο πολύ θαρώ. Μα εδώ δεν είναι βλέμμα ξένο κανένος, μήπως είμαι εγώ ξένος και ο μακρινός. Έλα στο χορό, μόνο να σε βλέπω, μόνο αυτό μπορώ. Βρε νύχτα ξαστεριά, άναψαν φωτάκια πάνω απ' τα χωριά. χορέψετε, χορέψετε τα νιάτα να χαρείτε, γιατί σε τούτο το ντούνια δεν θα τα ξαναβρείτε. Δώστε του χορού να πάει, τούτη γης θα μας εφάει, τούτη γης που την πατούμε, όλοι μέσα δεν να μπούμε. Κι όσοι έχουνε καλή καρδιά και τακτικά γλεντούνε, τώρα κι αυτοί το ψευτικό του νιάθε να χαρούνε. Παναγιά μου δώσ' του, όσο βάνει ο λογισμός του, όσο βάνει ο λογισμός του, Παναγιά μου δώσ' του. Παναγιά μου δώσ' του, όσο βάνει ο λογισμός του, όσο βάνει ο λογισμός του, Παναγιά μου δώσ' του. Thank you very much. That was a small selection of songs from the islands, and we'll play just a couple of songs from the mainland Greece. Some of them date as far back as 100 years ago, and some of them a little bit more contemporary. But I'm sure they'll have a lot of fans in the audience, and please help us out with the singing. There's only two of us here today, and many of you. Βασιλική τον έρωτα, πολύ βαρύ τον πήρες. Βασιλική τον έρωτα, πολύ βαρύ τον πήρες. Και στο μαριφκά την ντύσες, εκεί να ξεψυχήσεις. Και στο μαριφκά την ντύσες, εκεί να ξεψυχήσεις. Βασιλική σου όμορφη, ξανθιά σαν το κουκλάκι. Βασιλική σου όμορφη, ξανθιά σαν το κουκλάκι. Πώς το κάμες απόφαση και πήρες το φαρμάκι. Πώς το κάμες απόφαση και πήρες το φαρμάκι. Το φαρμάκι το καμά, ωραία λεμονάδα. Εγώ το φαρμάκι το καμά, ωραία λεμονάδα. Το σηκώνα και το πίνα με το συνοστιμάδα. Το σηκώνα και το πίνα με το συνοστιμάδα. Τα παιδιά με τα μαλλιά και με τα μαύρα ρούχα μου φέρνουνε μηνύματα από μια αγάπη που είχα. Μου φέρνουνε μηνύματα από μια αγάπη που είχα. Τα παιδιά με τα μαλλιά και με τα μαύρα ρούχα. Δώσ' τα νιάκια αμάν αμάν, δώσ' τα λιάνο χορταρούδια. Δώσ' τα λιάνο χορταρούδια, τίτρανος χορός θα γίνει. And we'll finish up with a song that in English it translates to mellow, but it's actually not very mellow at all. And it comes from the island of Crete, which is the origin of these two instruments that we're playing today. Thank you. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Thank you.
Amazing. How wonderful were they? Another big round of applause, please. Thank you to Angelo and Adoni. Now, everyone, we trust that you can take some time to enjoy the rest of your day. That ends the formalities, the speeches and entertainment. Now that we've unveiled the new panels behind me, please go and view your name anytime you like throughout the day, and of course, any day from here on in as well. There are a lot of people here today, as we heard, 1,600, so please be kind to each other and look out as everyone's trying to find their names. If you have booked lunch at Ripples or in the Ben Letchen Centre, they are both located past the lighthouse. Please follow the signage. Also, please visit the museum while you're here today. We have lots to see and do at the museum. It's open until 4 p.m, so please ask our staff for details. Please join me in thanking all of our speakers for sharing their stories and the performers today. And thank you again for attending to help us celebrate the lives and contributions of those honoured on the monument today, helping us all create this wonderful occasion. Race to see your names. Thank you.